Cosmo, also Christopher, and I'm just doing a check here. I want to make sure that we're hooked up okay. If you could just give me 1 second. Uh, okay, I think we're live. Um, anyway, so this is the late night. This is crossing the Rubicon with Cosmo, and I want to share with you a little bit about myself. I probably come at this tradition a little bit at a different angle. Uh, so, I would consider myself more or less a practical mystic if I were to put kind of I don't know, a focus to it. I've been involved in science and data and analytics in the film studio and even the medical diagnostic industry for a number of years. And what I found through all of that is that I really needed to balance the intuitive side of my life more. There was a lot of hard technical, rational kind of living. And really, the last 3 years, it just occurred to me, oh my goodness, things are just a little bit too one sided. And I really need the um, training and methods to really incorporate more of my ability to take value in each moment and really sense the depth of things, not just be so myopic in the way I live life. And this kind of started out. I went to Grace School of Wizardry, which is where Nicholas Kingsley is headmaster right now. I don't know if y'all are familiar with that, but I highly recommend that for anybody who's interested to explore the wizardly aspects from a secular standpoint. And it explores all things related to wisdom, how to live a life of service. And really, that is where this Correllian tradition really synced up with me, especially watching Magic TV for the last couple of years. Before I really knew the depth of the Correllian tradition, watching Reverend Don Lewis and all of his great discussion, his in depth analysis, his ability to talk civilly and respectfully and have an empathetic view to other viewpoints. And I thought, wow, here's just a great model to emulate, especially at the Parliament of World Religions. I imagine that that's the exact skill that we need to cultivate. How do you find that commonality between us and other faiths, other traditions, so that we can solve these global problems and put aside any kind of polarity that's going to restrict us from coming together as global citizens? And I really feel like Reverend Don Lewis just embodied that mentality. And so between that, the Grace School of Wizardry, and then I also am part of Chicago Shamanic Arts in Los Angeles. So Coyote the Blind does a really great job with bringing the Toltec tradition and shamanic thinking and practices into the spiritual path. And so there's a lot of that really led me toward recently fulfilling my first degree initiation. So now I'm officially first degree Correllian tradition. And that was about 2 weeks ago. I went to Florida and had that as part of visiting Reverend Don Lewis and Ed Hubbard and also Lori Denman. And it was just fantastic. And I love the process they took me through to really connect and understand that baggage that I want to set aside, and having the goddess kind of come in and put a new perspective on how I look at myself. And what I love is they took very careful time with that. It was very nurturing. I just loved it. And so I'm very much proud to be a part of this tradition now. It's another path on my practice. And so what I've done is I've recorded about 50 minutes here because I'm at a hotel. I had to travel. So I want to make sure that I give you good quality in case the internet goes bad. And this actually brings in where space comes into my metaphysical practice, how we look at the future of space travel, how we change our paradigm to not look just within this earth, but imagine we're outside of the planet And how does that change our perspective? How do we view the fragility of this planet and incorporate that in the fact that we're all sharing this graceful, grace-filled moment of time and space together, and incorporating that into the metaphysical practice. So tonight I'm going to play that, and then I'm going to follow that up with another hour after that of some very choice videos that I've put together from Reverend Don Lewis. Again, he's been a big inspiration, and I want tonight to be about metaphysics, looking at space first, and then looking at Reverend Don Lewis's perspective on evolution, on planes of existence, the twin flames, immortality, free will, and suffering. And I thought he had just wonderful talks on this. So I've kind of packaged this up for the second hour because I think tonight, talking about space, how we integrate that, and then bringing metaphysics into that would round out a really fantastic 2 hours for my Crossing the Rubicon. So let me get started with that, and I hope you all enjoy it. Hello, I'm Cosmo, also known as Christopher Poufall. You can always find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on pagan.world. I have very minimal Facebook presence. I've not been too heavy on social media outside of LinkedIn, but you'll likely find me there. I think of recent, you might have noticed that I was initiated as a first degree into the Correllian tradition. And that just really enriched my own eclectic kind of spiritual path. So I'm looking forward to continuing that journey and to intertwine that into all the other ways that I'm kind of looking at the world. And one of them I'm going to talk about today has to do with space and how we integrate um, what space exploration represents, the overview effect, as a way to enhance how we look at the planet, um, and how we think of ourselves as a collective in our spiritual journey individually, but also how we would think of ourselves in the context of future humanity. So before I get into the subject of space, I just wanted to put a plug in for Crossing the Rubicon, which is a segment I'm hoping to do more of this year. It's a little bit of a play on my magical or vision name, Cosmo Rubiconis. I've kind of collapsed two concepts there. One's a fascination with all things space, the other being this notion of how we have these transformative paradigm shifts in our life. Hopefully we do, and it will hopefully raise our awareness, or we'll have some kind of spiritual awakening. And these represent what I would consider boundaries that when you cross them, like a Rubicon, you can't really go back to who you were. It transforms you in a way that puts you on another level. And so that's really what Crossing the Rubicon is intended to be, as far as a segment in exploring the spiritual path, maybe looking at art, humanities, looking at technology, and how we're collectively evolving together in this next decade. I mean, things are coming so rapidly that I think in a lot of ways, and we're seeing this with AI, there's a significant shift in impact. And we really have to recalibrate ourselves internally because of these new paradigm shifts. I mean, we've had them in the past, the Industrial Revolution, the Apollo program starting in the 60s, calculators, computers, but the whole notion of AI really is transformative in starting to kind of represent a lot of what our brain does. And we've never really had this before, where it's taking over and duplicating a lot of the thought processes. And so I think there's going to be a lot of discussion on what is sentience, what is sapience, how do we apply knowledge, how do we dissect and cut through disinformation, which is going to be a big thing. I mean, we have to have our critical thinking cap on more than ever in this new world. So I do want to go over that a little bit more, but so I want to talk about the Parliament of World Religions before I go into my segment and just make a pitch for that. If you're seeing my segment in 2023 in May, this is an event that's upcoming in August. And you may be seeing this segment during the telethon, which we're trying to do to support the Correllian tradition, attending that to represent the eclectic pagan community as part of this interfaith gathering, this organization. And let me just pull up something here. Let's see. So if you haven't looked at this, let's make sure, yeah, you're seeing me here. The Parliament of World Religions, you can go to parliamentofreligions.org and learn all about its mission. There's been a lot of visionaries here. If we look here, you'll see the Dalai Lama has been here, Jimmy Carter, Jane Goodall. One more thing on the Parliament of World Religions. There's probably going to be several hundred classes there over the course of that week, or workshops, discussions. There's going to be opportunities for networking. Obviously, different cultures or different spiritual traditions may also present their own music, their dance, some of their artistic expressions. But it's also a way to have the pagan community's voice heard and make it a more prominent part than ever before of these interfaith dialogues, these interfaith discussions. And the parliament's not really there to try to convince somebody to join somebody else's faith. They're there to find that commonality. How can we find those common strains of our wisdom traditions so that we can work together toward common purpose? And this is why I want to discuss space, because I think when we look at ourselves from the perspective of being on this really very tiny little fragile planet within the immensity of the cosmic arena, with so many galaxies and stars and habitable planets across its expanse, it's a way to really put things in perspective and maybe introduce new paradigms in how we think about our own planet right now, and what are those best things we want to cultivate if we travel to the stars, which no doubt we will. But this is all kind of intertwining for me. As important part of crossing the Rubicon, it's how do you live an integrated life? How do you take all of these mental models and frameworks that we learn about in life and let them kind of holistically assimilate into ourselves to kind of refine how we look at the world, how we look at each other, how we look at things we're connected to. And so for me, it's another layer of enrichment to that spiritual path. And I'm talking again about space. And I feel like this could be a conversation they're going to have at the Parliament of World Religions, that as well as, like I said, AI or technology. There's so many rapid developments going on in the next 10 to 20 years that if we don't get ahead of that with all this thought process and this thought work, it's going to come and surprise us. So I think humans are really good about acclimating to change, but it seems like of late it's happening more often than ever. And so, excuse me for this, I'm going to wipe. Speaking of humans, let me do my human thing and clear my vision here a little bit physically, if not internally. So anyway, that's a Parliament of Religions. Hopefully you can check that out. If you're interested, if you want to attend, I mean, there may be opportunities there still. It's in August, but certainly be a part of the ongoing discussion, join it. And if it's of interest, be informed by what's going on and keep a pulse on what comes out of that parliament at the end of August. So Let's talk about space a bit. Um, Let me scroll down. I've got my little talking points, so I keep my brain straight because I'll forget stuff, especially if I go down a tangent. But one of the things I want to talk about, and I'm going to share a screen again, is in a moment, is the overview effect. And I don't know if some of you are familiar with that, but the astronauts talk about that. Um, and you probably, I don't know if y'all saw William Shatner when he went up, uh, no, not too long ago. And he had that shift, that paradigm shift, and it changes the way you think about the planet because when the astronauts talk about that, and sometimes it's an instantaneous effect they have, and sometimes this is an effect over time. But looking at that planet as you get further and further out, you realize what a fragile, interconnected place it is. You can imagine looking out from the moon and seeing this little bluish dot. Um, and when they go into Mars, it will definitely be a dot from that distance. So at each one of those, you probably have a different shift in how you think about the planet. And as it gets smaller, I mean, just think about the expanse of the universe. And I think William Shatner even said there was a sense of sadness um, because it does look so small in the vast darkness of the universe. But at the same time, I suppose you have this sense of majesty too. Um, just the sheer, unfathomable expanse of the universe. I mean, billions of habitable planets, potentially galaxies. Um, I mean, we're just one of billions of galaxies that are stretched across the universe, and it's continuing to expand outward. So, so the overview effect. One of the aspects the astronauts have noted is that obviously you don't see those delineated map boundaries between countries. It's one consistent, holistic planet. And if we start to think about that and bring that back into how we treat each other, I think you could almost formulate a common philosophical platform based on that, that we are really in this existence by grace. I mean, we didn't create ourselves. We just kind of, we're here and we're sharing this planet together. And there should be a real deep sense of humility by contemplating that. And the fact that if you consider like the Wiccan read, do as thou will, but harm none, uh, it seems like that's a natural progression from this understanding that we're all in this symbiotic relationship with this planet and with each other. And each action has a ripple effect across space, across time, across generations, within our families, within our friends, within, it's like a butterfly effect sometimes. Even the little things, you don't realize how much they interconnect and how one little cause can ripple through with other effects. And I think part of the considering the overview effect, that overview of looking back on the planet and seeing it not grounded here, but above it, floating above it, that should create that sense of, my goodness, what are we bickering about? What are we fighting about? How can we try to work together more? And obviously, you could imagine that's a core premise of Parliament of World Religions is this notion of how do we work together. The overview effect has really been evangelized by Frank White. He's an author, space philosopher. Let me show you for context here. This is on his website, so you can go to that, learn more about Frank White. But he's been very prominent in the industry, and he's interviewed a lot of astronauts to get their different perspectives. Those who have been in the space station, those who have been in low Earth orbit, those who have been to the moon. and kind of added all of that perspective. And if you want to get his book on the overview effect, which he first wrote in 1987, you can find that book out there. He's on his fourth edition now, and you can, there's been a lot of more travel into space, so he's been able to incorporate a lot more perspectives in there. This is really fundamental, I think, leveraging the overview effect into the way we think about our connections to each other. And so that's why I wanted to bring that up today. This here, there's an Earthrise from the Apollo days. This picture was taken. I mean, just look at this planet. If you don't see anything else there, you definitely see there's no borders, right? Everything's very fluid and organic, and it looks very much like a symbiotic organism. And look at the darkness of space. And I imagine as we go to Mars, eventually this thing's just going to be a tiny little dot, and it's just going to continue to disappear, and it's going to really emphasize the fragility, but yet the miraculous nature of this existence that we have. It's just a thing of beauty. But it's fascinating to look at this from, they're on moon here back in this, we're going to see more of this when the Artemis missions start to land or, navigate around the moon. We're going to see a lot of beautiful images. A generation that didn't get to experience the Apollo moon landing is going to really be a part of that whole experience again. This was actually my very first memory when I must have been 4, the Apollo moon landing. I remember sitting and watching it with my dad on TV, and that just happens to be my very first memory. And that's why, like I said, my vision name is Cosmo. I think it's to commemorate this notion of this seed that got planted at such an early age and has stuck with me ever since. So let's see. What is the next thing I want to talk about here? Well, I think I didn't mention this, but how can you experience the overview effect if you don't actually go into space? I mean, there may be opportunities. Obviously, there's more private industry getting involved in space tourism at some point. And so there may be opportunities for some. I've done skydiving, solo, free fall training, and had a sense of that where you could see that curvature of the planet and being so high up. And once I pulled the ripcord, I mean, I'm floating out on my own. And it gave me a sense that I think I can compare, not to the extent that an astronaut has obviously witnessed it, but I'm going to, embrace that as a way for me to internalize that experience, that overview effect, because it did have that kind of profound paradigm shift for me when I did that. Another thing that I did was deprivation tanks. So we have one, I'm here in Los Angeles, and there's a good place in Pasadena. And I did the deprivation tank where you get into the salt bath that you float on. And it's completely sound insulated and obviously visually insulated. So it was complete darkness. The only sound was hearing myself, my heartbeat, my breathing, the water. And eventually I got so relaxed that, it just became complete silence. And I imagined myself floating in space in this darkness. And it was interesting where it took me because I had an emotional journey of imagining myself lost in a state of oblivion, so to speak, a state of complete isolation from all those that I loved, all my family members, my friends, and I tried to imagine what that would be like. And it's a very interesting thought to entertain. It makes you appreciate all the more those who are in your life, because feeling that complete separation, I kind of try to bring that back into the way I look at others, because life is so short and we come into this for a brief time. We move on, whatever your belief is, if it's reincarnation, if you think things end, if you think the soul moves on to another level, regardless of that, while we're here, I mean, we're not quite sure what goes on after, or at least I'm not 100% sure. And so I think in that sense, it does give you a sense of the beauty of life and trying to enjoy every moment, not just how long you can live, but how much can you saturate yourself into the experience of the now, so to speak. And so that deprivation tank was really something, and I'm going to go back and do that. I did some great journaling from that, some good introspective work, but that kind of had a sense of the overview effect. And I've done VR where you've been floating out into space, and there's some really good simulations of that. So there's other ways you can kind of experience it. So speaking of this deprivation tank, I was just noting, I have here my journal. And these were some notes that I had taken. Um, let's see. I found when my eyes were closed that the image formulated around my thoughts, which I didn't want. Let's see. Here's the point. Opening my eyes in the darkness allowed me, once I got acclimated to the darkness and no sound. At first, I was trying to look inwardly, but once I opened my eyes, it moved my thoughts from being inward to being more outward. And so there was this notion, there was this kind of vision of undulating, clouding, pulsating ether that I noted. And at this point, my brain waves got deeper and more relaxed. And I had moments of recognition of an ever present, ever present now. So once all this sound and images were kind of set aside, I had the most intimate notion of nowness set in, which was interesting. And I'm making note of it here. It directed my attention to the empty space between where no motion and no sound had movement. So, in other words, it's almost like one reason I like journaling is you're getting to the essence of the space between the words. And by being in this deprivation tank, it was almost like I found the crevice uh, of this instantaneous, infinite moment of now between all sensation. And I just sat there and saturated in that. And that was where this deprivation tank was the most valuable, because I conjectured eternity in this state. Um, but also not just eternity, as I said, as if it was oblivion. So I kind of redirected my thoughts to say, wow, what if I was forever caught up in this emptiness? And in a sense, I think that's some of what that overview effect could create, imagining this sense of emptiness, this fragile planet we're on. But when you look at it from outside in this vast universe, it can be a really unsettling thought. I mean, you could have feelings of sadness about it. You could have feelings of awe. I mean, each person may be a little different, but I think in the end, we would have a sense that we have this shared magical, miraculous destiny, that we even exist at this moment in an infinity of time. And I think it's really something to kind of saturate into that and think about that kind of I don't know, like I said, thinking about the space between words, the space between our thoughts, and getting lost into that moment, because I think that's where we find wisdom, we find our best sense of appreciation for life. And in a lot of ways, that's what death gives us. If the more we can confront death and accept that natural state that exists, that affects us all, I believe that we can take that back into how we view life. We can build empathy for each other because we're all in this shared journey together. We all have to go through that doorway together. So anyway, that was a lot of what I got out of the deprivation tank, and I'm going to go back again. I'm sure I'll have other thoughts there. For some of us, when we think about space, it just broadens our view of what humanity is capable of. It blows open the doors of our imagination. It, at least for me, it enhances my sense of wonder and possibility. Um, Obviously, more tactically, more grounded, we need to balance priorities, right? Because we have needs on Earth, and some could rightfully say, why are we going out into space when we have so many issues here? But I think if we were just to spend our time just thinking about this planet, not thinking about our future, not thinking about the fact that there's more to life and there's more to this universe than just this myopic state of living that we have, I think it can enhance, again, how we view life. So, and then you look about what space offers for solving issues for the Earth. We have technology that's advanced for how we monitor and respond to disasters like fires and earthquakes. Um, we've had beneficial technology come from that we've all benefited from. Thousands of inventions, wireless headsets, solar panels, um, digital cameras, LEDs. Um, I made another note here. We like anti-icing systems, home insulation materials, baby formula. There's just a whole host. I can't even scratch the surface of all the benefits that space industry has provided directly back to us. Um, and I think the other thing is, understanding who we are, understanding our origins, understanding our connection to this planet and how that's evolved over time. Um, I mean, that right there is just fascinating of itself. What is it, 4.5 billion years of evolution, thinking about how mammals have evolved over time to where we are today, um, and using that knowledge to help inform where we're heading. Collaboration, inspiration between countries and now private companies, but in particular, the space industry has been an example of how different countries, even if they've been on somewhat opposite sides politically, have come together to collaborate for a common cause. Um, and so that's important. Education that comes with the sciences, how we apply that back, investing in the future of humanity. One thing that's really cool, I don't know if y'all have heard of this. This is called LifeShip. And you can go to let's see, where is it at? Lifeship.com. Let me do something here real quick, just to give you bearings in case you're interested in this. And what this is a company that you can go through to send your DNA into space. So if you wanted to be a part of future moon missions or Mars missions, and I actually got one of these kits. So something interesting to be a part of this journey, even if we never have a chance for some of us to actually go into space. It gives us a sense of being connected to that exploration, that process, that embrace of the future. Is Here's the life ship again. It's interesting. There's little inserts here to learn about what this involves. And, I think the kit that I have is supposed to launch next year. So here's a little kit that you can swab and put your DNA into, and then you mail it to Life Ship, and then it'll be a part of a future, in this particular case, to the moon. But if they continue to be successful, then it could be part of Mars missions or even other space destinations. But I find that fascinating, something I always want to do. And I imagine that I would seriously consider being cremated and having ashes sent to the moon or something, again, because there's such a connection in my life that I would want to be a part of that in some way. I would want to know that I'm out there spread across the stars. I think there's something beautiful to that. So, anyway, yeah, if you're interested in that, lifeship.com, that could be a way for you to be more directly involved in all this. Let's see. I wanted to read a poem that I wrote years ago. It almost captures this other sense of this overview effect, but I got it sitting at the ocean, and I wrote it for somebody who they had brain cancer at the time, and it was something that I was contemplating since we all both loved the ocean. Let me see if I can share this with you, and I'll read this because this is a poem. This is also on my website, by the way. So if you ever want to put in spaceepic.com, this site needs to be recreated. But I have some old stuff here, interesting pictures from Africa as well. But let me make sure I'm sharing this. Yeah, okay. So let me read this out to you because this for some reason, when I was thinking about space and overview effect, this poem came back to my mind. So, what secrets does the ocean have for me tonight? Induced by some long ago lit fuse, waves rise and crack the shoreline, rhythmically dancing along the sand, water surging, swelling, crescendoing until a climax is reached. Symphonic instruments of water and land and those of the wind weave together their harmonies and then dissolve. Yet the symphony is far from over, as another measure is played, and then another, as each wave conveys the perpetuity of the life of the ocean and of life at large. The orchestration tonight relates tales from distant lands, for the rhythms of the surf have likewise been savored on remote shores. Other hearts, perhaps human, or maybe of dolphins or great whales, have also pleasured in this melody. Though the world above that I see is separated from the world below the waves, both are waters poured into existence from the same source of life, and I feel deep kinship. It is that profound wonderment of standing at the edge of one world and beholding another that is the essence of why I'm drawn to this place tonight. The undulating surface reflects the lights along the beach, silvery and shimmery like youthful eyes. Waves reach out with hands and envelop themselves into the moment with no particular worry for the future, as if little children were frolicking together and skipping toward the shore. Farther out, I see myself floating and being rocked in the arms of the ocean, immersed in the uncertainty of her deep unknown, humbled by the great expanse, gasping for breath and melting in the awe of her renewing ageless beauty. Surely the heart of a child beats inside the chest of infinity. How utterly mystifying is the cosmic balance that allows the smallest to mingle among the greatest. So much more inscrutable is the mystery that we even exist at all. All my concerns are cleansed by the water of this most humbling of contemplations. I walk up to the ocean and thank her for her companionship tonight as she kisses the sand and gently anoints my feet. This is how creation is, always serving, always teaching, patiently waiting for us to listen to deeper, transcendent truths. Even in her unknowable majesty, she graciously accounts for the least of all creatures. I leave with a gift of eternal value, one that has fully made me whole. Tonight, I touch the face of the sacred and experience the sweet realization of my soul. So, yeah, so I think when I think about this, you can have this overview effect in areas that are really in part of our everyday experience. If we just allow our imagination to run free. This was a particular night when I was journaling at the ocean. And you can imagine this mystery and awe of this deep unknown. In this case, it was the ocean, but it was a very resonating symbol for what the cosmos might be, the universe, and this vast expanse of the unknown. And just being at that edge of discovery, that edge of this powerful awe of creation. And for me, that's like a powerful seed that informs a whole vast philosophy of life. And I think each time that I contemplate that, I get a new angle to that, a new, I don't know, principle that I add to my arsenal for how I live. So, anyway, I wanted to share that. Let me flip back over here. So, another thing I wanted to share is I'm part of a group called Spacekind. Um, my degree originally was in physics, and I always thought that I would be an astronaut. When I was in high school, I wrote a speech that actually won an award at the time, where I talked about my commitment to that path. Somehow, life allowed it to take different divergent paths at that time, and then had a family, started working in the medical diagnostic industry, then technology, IT, film studios, which is where I'm at now. Uh, but I feel like at some point that's converging back. And so through this space kind, it allows me to recultivate that passion that I had, as well as integrating my creative writing side, which I really enjoy. Um, but space kind, let me show you this, because I encourage anybody who's interested in space exploration. Um, it Let's see if you can see this here. Yes. So spacecon.org, they periodically have training. This was started by uh, Loretta Hidalgo Whitesides. And so she's a Virgin Galactic founder astronaut. She founded Spacekind. She co-founded Yuri's Night, which I recently volunteered for in LA, where the space industry comes together and kind of celebrates all things space. And there's a lot of luminaries that attend, and it's just a fun time. The cool thing with Spacekind is it's taking these principles we're talking about, but it's also applying like the hero's journey to that. And you're looking not only collectively at what it's like to be a part of a future space going humanity, but how can we first cultivate the best of who we are internally? Because we don't want to take the garbage and the weaknesses that we have to other places, so to speak. So the other thing is we want to honor diversity and diverse viewpoints because we're going to make the best kind of decisions when we bring diverse views together to enrich that process. So if we have to build a new world because this world gets depleted, we're overpopulated, we want to make sure we're bringing the best of who we are. That's really what Space Kind is about. And it's marrying principles of space into the notion of kindness and empathy and how we honor ourselves and how we honor each other and the connectedness that we have to this fragile planet uh, and to space. Obviously, we're all star stuff of the stars. And so it's really getting us to think about that connection beyond just our local realities. You know, sometimes we're so caught up in the work that we do or the day to day or just our small family or friends. But, you know, in a lot of ways, there's a butterfly effect to everything we do. There's a cause and effect that ripples across in countless ways that we don't even imagine. And so thinking about that is really important. As part of Spacekind, Loretta wrote this book called The New Right Stuff. I'm showing it here, but let me also show it because I have a copy here. And you can find this on Kindle. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it through her website. And it's a fascinating book. It takes you through, it's using the framework of the hero's journey. So I don't know if you're familiar with that. For those who are into film or cinema or storytelling, the hero's journey is about the path that a hero takes in a story, going from ordinary world, going into the cave to find a magical elixir to solve some crucial problem, and then making that last victorious stand to hopefully come out changed in a positive way. And so Loretta uses this framework in her training to take you on the personal journey, but also to think about how we apply that as a collective. And let's see here. So again, I'm back on Wikipedia here. I think her little visual of the hero's journey was a bit more informative, but again, you've got this call to adventure. And really, this is, if you look at the major arcana of the tarot, you could probably fit that into the same paradigm here where the Fool strikes out to go through their own spiritual evolution and return, hopefully, truly transformed. So there's usually about 7 or 8 steps to this, but when you look at this, you know, you start out in your normal world, and then there's something that happens that brings you out of your comfort zone. And for a lot of us, sometimes that can be just very simple things. Anything that creates uncertainty in our lives, sometimes that calls us to a unique adventure. And I think when you go through this little hero's journey in your life, and you can go through it in different moments and different phases of your life, you create resilience to deal with uncertainty. And then I think what that does is build grace into how you live life and how you treat each other. Because you can be more patient, you can be more fluid with things you can't necessarily control, and you think about what you can control, what's within yourself that you have power over. And a lot of that is a mental state. A lot of it's physical, but there's so much that's mental and emotional that we have control over that we could cultivate. And anyway, so the the hero's journey, I think, is a great framework to take yourself through. Here's another elaboration on this. Um, Joseph Campbell obviously wrote about this years ago, The Hero with a Thousand Faces. And, films like Star Wars really adhere to this hero's journey if you want a very clear representation of what that means. Another um, value that I get out of meeting with the space industry and the space kind group in particular is thinking about problems in different domain spaces. And I think that's going to be key with AI. We're going to have to not necessarily be kind of focused on one skill set over time. I think there's probably going to be a need for some to diversify. The more we can learn about the world, the more we can build mental models of how the world works. And that could be like studying history, which I think is super important, studying the humanities, studying critical reasoning. That's going to be more important than ever. Just to close off that, with Space Kind, I'm going through level 2 now, coming up. Probably I would have already started by the time you see this. And it's really taking me on a transformative journey, opened me up to think more deeply about myself and be a part of something bigger and help maybe shape the way people think about space, at least in my local, let's say, group of connections that I have. I can kind of evangelize what I'm learning. And then, if it resonates with those who enjoy the same things or are moved by where we're going with space exploration. Um, if you want to learn more about some of the missions, you can go to NASA's launch schedule on nasa.gov. You can look at the missions. The Artemis mission, for instance, is the one that's going to the moon. They just selected the first 4 crew members that will go on the first ship to the moon. But you can find a whole bunch of other interesting bits about upcoming missions and learn a lot more about that. So this is a good website to keep in mind, nasa.gov, and then go to the launch schedule or upcoming missions, for instance. There's also this A to Z, if you want to drill through it even more and look at the history, like Apollo program. So a lot of fascinating stuff there to learn about the history. There's just so much information. Let's see, what else do I want to talk about? Probably the biggest thing it offers me, though, is thinking about life in different paradigms, different domains, different mental models. And I think it enriches maybe my critical thinking skills and how I approach some of this new technology like AI that's transforming a lot of how we're going to work and how we engage with knowledge. And I think it's going to be super crucial to have the skills to sift through any kind of disinformation or coercive things that could be negatives, so that we can benefit from the positives. I think this is probably a good place to end. I really appreciate you hanging out with me today, and hopefully you enjoyed my discussion of space, or it resonated with you in some way. I thought Back on that hero's journey, though, before I close off, I wanted to share again something here off my personal site. This is my altar space as it currently sits, and you can see there's a lot of kind of Arthurian myth in here, and the myth is really important. Archetypes, the collective unconscious, and weaving that um, those resonating stories into my creative space, my altar space, for things that resonate with me with those myths. And so I don't know that may change over time, but um, when I was walking through the hero's journey, it occurred to me maybe to show you this as just kind of a way that I've encapsulated that notion um, of the hero's journey, Excalibur, King Arthur, Merlin, Guinevere into my space. I guess that's it. I thank you so much for spending time with me today and going through this little bit of journey, my little bit of rambling. Hopefully, it wasn't too much. I tried to tighten up the editing a bit just to snip out some of the dead space in there. Um, but I do thank you so much for being here uh, and listening, and hopefully, something resonated to so that you can take that into your own metaphysical journey, your own magical life, um, to enhance it, to enrich it, just as it's done for me. So, again, thank you so much. So, I appreciate you sticking around for that. Now, I'm going to roll right through into my second hour here because I have, like I mentioned, I wanted to follow up with Reverend Don Lewis. He did some really good metaphysical. Obviously, everything he does is just like gold. But I took some effort to package up a few things. So as we talked about space, talked about metaphysics, I want to get it. I want to play a little bit of the video here. I put together some segments he did on planes of existence, immortality, free will, and suffering. And so I want to roll right into that. Um, and let me go ahead and pull that up, and then let's get started to enrich the second hour here of Crossing the Rubicon.
Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from beautiful Florida. And today our question comes to us from Skeptic Psychologist, or rather, our series of questions related to evolution and the soul. And because this is a series of questions closely related to one another, dealing with a very complex subject, I want to start by saying that I do not remotely guarantee that I'm going to touch on every aspect of these answers. I'm going to give general answers, which I think are suitable to the vlog format. The kind of questions we're going to be talking about are things that in Correllian teaching you generally would not encounter in many cases until certainly second and often third degree, or even only if you were to pursue World Walker training. It's not that no one else can know these, but that's where you would receive the instruction for them. And this is because they are considered higher teachings and they are more complicated than certain other questions might be. And therefore the answer will also be more complicated. This is rather like the subject of giving an oracle. In the Correllian tradition, anyone can learn to give an oracle, but a third degree must learn to give an oracle. Oracles are expected of third degrees, even if only once. But it's not required for anyone else, but that doesn't mean others can't also learn it. And this is kind of like that. You would receive instruction at those levels. It doesn't mean you can't study it at other levels. So, having said that, these are the questions. The first question is, what is the Correllian position on biological evolution? And we've talked about that here at the vlog on a number of occasions, and I will go back over it. We believe very much in biological evolution, and we believe that is the tool of creation. So we are creationists, but also evolutionists, and we see no particular conflict in these points of view. We believe that evolution is how creation unfolds. And we would agree with the idea that every living creature on the earth is descended from common ancestors, ultimately a common ancestor. And we believe that this is how spirit has chosen to express itself in the material world. And we believe that evolution has a guidance from spirit and also from ourselves. We believe that while one is not conscious of it, particularly various forms of life which are less intellectual than humans, but even humans, we believe that though we have not the consciousness of it, we nonetheless are shaping our evolution at a spiritual level, and that this is just as true for amoebas and dogs and cats and fruit bats and what have you, that their soul level is actively involved in their physical evolution. But that physical evolution is very much the tool by which the goals of spirit are expressed in the flesh. So again, we are creationists and evolutionists at the same time and do not see these things as being in conflict. And I will also point out that in the 19th century, when evolution was being brought on the scene in the modern world, the people who brought it forward came in two kinds: theistic evolutionists and atheistic evolutionists. And of course, the latter became the dominant point of view, but theistic evolution is not at all a new concept. So that's our first question. The second question is, do all living things experience an afterlife? And I do have these written down because there are so many of them. Do all living things experience an afterlife? We would say yes. We would say that the nature of that afterlife depends in part on the nature of the physical life and how much of the soul was invested in that life, how much consciousness that life had or did not have, how much growth that life had or did not have. But we would say that in theory, all living things, as well as things that in the ordinary world might not be considered living things, have an afterlife, and a part of them is always there. But obviously, if they were merely reactive in their physical existence, then there's not going to be much of them there, because there wasn't really that much of them here. And those that were more complex will have a more complex afterlife. And in keeping with the subject we just spoke to, the idea of creationism and evolution as things that are working together, we also believe in afterlife and reincarnation, but that hinges in part on questions that are going to be coming up in this series. So, if only things of a certain intelligence or level of consciousness survive, what about the others? Well, we kind of just answered that. And I would say that the survival in the afterlife has to do with how much there actually was of the life. But it's important to remember also that what manifested in this world was not all there was. We all have a higher self, human and non-human alike. And those higher selves are more complex and more evolved than what is shown in the physical world. So just because not much happened in that physical life, say for example, well, let's consider my sister. She died when she was 4 years old. There's not a lot of life there. But that does not mean her soul is not as complex as any other. In fact, there is a teaching that in the afterlife, souls tend to express themselves in a mature manner regardless of the age at which they died, and is often perceived as being around 33 years of age. But of course, age is irrelevant to the soul, but in terms of what people will perceive, that is often what has been described as being perceived. That just because one is very old at the time of their death does not mean that they're very old in their afterlife. Just because someone was very young at the time of their death does not mean they're very young in their afterlife. And because it is the higher self that actually survives, negative traits also tend not to survive in that afterlife. And there's a saying that I've often heard that if drunk Uncle Harry was drunk Uncle Harry in life, he is going to be drunk Uncle Harry in death as an ancestor. But this is not in fact what people experience who work with ancestors. Drunk Uncle Harry will have put down those negative aspects in transitioning into the higher self. And what you will experience in working with drunk Uncle Harry as an ancestor is the better self that Uncle Harry could have been. So, continuing, the last question is the soul evolved or bestowed? And again, the answer for us would be both. We would say that the souls were created through the medium of the monads from deity, that deity broke off the souls from itself, and therefore all souls ultimately are deity, but through a kind of chain, for want of a better way to put it, that goes from deity to the monad to the soul to the life, and then to the event. And that this chain is a very important part of understanding what you're dealing with. And at each step in that chain, there are numerous splits. For example, in one lifetime, there are many, many events. In one soul, there are many, many lifetimes. And in one monad, there are many, many souls. And in deity, there are many monads. Specifically, we teach 9. Now, the soul initially is bestowed by deity, if you want to put it that way, that comes from deity and is never truly separate from deity. But as it goes forward and it experiences, it in effect splits, kind of like a tree branch. So that monad evolves into many souls. Those souls evolve into many lifetimes. And these are not necessarily new beginnings, these are branches. And we hold that the soul continues to branch out the longer it exists. And this happens in one of 2 ways. In the first instance, we hold that the soul can have many different lifetimes coexisting at the same time in the physical world. Part of the reason for this is that time is different for the soul. Part of the reason is that the soul is much more complex than the physical lifetime, than the physical consciousness. And as the soul does this, those many different lifetimes coexisting at once do not all go back together. As they go forward, they become separate streams of incarnation. They split, they branch. And where the soul had 1 life, it may then have 5. It may then have 15, as these branch through subsequent incarnations. And when you do past life work and you go back up that branch, you go up your particular branch. But the farther you go, the more of these different lifetimes connect. And as I said, this is complex higher teaching, but this is what we teach. Now, the second way that this occurs is that we believe that there are many different probabilities, that we live in a multiverse, not a universe, and that there are many different variations on this world that we are living in. And that when a lifetime comes to a major choice, often all different variations on that choice are made in different probabilities. And therefore, the life also branches. So there's not just one version of any given life necessarily. There can be several different versions. There could be many versions depending on what was set to be learned in that life. And what began as a single stream of the soul going into that life, by the time the life is ended, could be many. And these 2 don't come back together. They go forward as separate streams of the soul, and in the different probabilities in which they have been lived. So, in 3rd degree, I talk about how when I was first taught these things, I had difficulty understanding them. I could not wrap my mind around them. Probably did not help that I was quite young, but I think that the higher teachings are hard to wrap your mind around. And I was very fortunate to have as my teacher Lady Crystal, my principal teacher, and her enlightened attitude was, okay, we'll come back to this later. And she waited 6 months before she came back to it. And amazingly, all of those concepts I had trouble grasping were much clearer after 6 months, even though I had not come back to them in my mind. I had not thought about them, I had not worked on them, but my consciousness had expanded and they were no longer mind-boggling to me. So what I advise people when they're studying these things is that if at first it doesn't make a lot of sense to you, take some time away from it. Come back to it and look at it again. Now, I do always tell people to trust only what makes sense to them. But when you're in a situation where you've already seen many things that are true and effective, it can be good to take a little while and let certain things sink in. The idea of multiverses and probabilities is particularly difficult if you have not worked with the nature of reality. And, I've talked on the vlog before about how some people love to stress all the dangers of metaphysics, most of which I don't think are particularly dangerous. But what is dangerous is the possibility of losing your place in the reality that you are in by studying the illusory nature of reality itself. You have to be very grounded and have a strong sense of self to work with these things, and this is why. But nonetheless, we have discussed these subjects, which, as I say, are considered higher teachings. We have not touched on every aspect of them. We have not certainly gone into them in any kind of exhaustive way. But we have touched on them in a way that is appropriate to the vlog. So I hope you found it interesting. And until next time, may you blessed be. Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from beautiful Florida. And today our question comes to us from Spellcaster 1998. And Spellcaster 1998 asks if I could do a vlog on the subject of the planes of existence. And Spellcaster 1998 goes on to say that they feel as if they might be more strongly connected to a different plane than the one in which their primary consciousness resides, and could I comment upon this as well? And, of course, a vlog is a fairly short format for such a lofty subject, but we can get quite a bit in. And the first thing that has to be said about the planes of existence is that the concept of separate planes is very much a human one. And where you demarcate different separations is pretty arbitrary. They actually represent a continuum, which is generally thought of as stretching from the utmost material manifestation to the utmost spiritual manifestation, and different people demark them in different ways. The most common system is 7 planes of existence, but you'll also find as few as 3 or 4 and as many as 12 or even 19 or more. There are many different ways of looking at it, and all of these are basically human constructs on an existential reality. And I would compare it to a person's lifetime. When a person can be said to become mature, when they can be said to become middle-aged, when they can be said to become old, is a highly subjective thing, but as a society, we generally say certain years are the time of maturity, the time of middle age, the time of old age, etc. But those ages are purely arbitrary. We have put them there to help our understanding. They have nothing to do with existential reality, and the planes of existence are the same way. The planes are actually there, of course, but how you describe them is to help you to understand them, and they are actually much more fluid. Having said that, the planes as I understand them, and I must of course come from my own background, are these: the physical plane, the emotional plane, the mental plane, the astral plane, the solar plane, the monadic plane, and the divine. And again, other systems have other ways of recognizing them, but the movement from physical to spiritual is usually the gist of it. And the way that I was taught is that our point of conscious reference is generally somewhere between the mental and the astral plane for the current point of humanity and society. And the way we can tell where we are is by what we can easily perceive. All the planes we've traveled through and mastered are easy for us to perceive. We can very easily perceive the physical, we can very easily perceive the emotional, we can very easily perceive the mental. We don't necessarily perceive everything about them, but we can perceive them, we know they're there, we don't have to work to have a knowledge that we can think. We don't have to work to have a knowledge that we can feel. These things are simply present. The planes we have not yet traveled through and mastered, we have to work to have any knowledge of. We know there's an astral plane, but you have to work to have an awareness of it and to be able to consciously interact with it. We know there's a solar plane, but again, we have to work very hard to gain access to what it has to offer, and so forth. And some people are a little bit farther along between the mental and the astral than others, and some people are a little farther into the mental plane than others, and this is only natural. We are not all in quite the same place because we are individuals, and everyone has their own journey. The entire human species is not in the same place at any one given time. And each individual is basically in their own path. Some will be a little bit more developed in one plane or another. No two will be quite alike, and you'll see this reflected in the chakra system if you study the minor chakras. Some people will have much stronger development in certain chakras than others, which has to do with their experience in traveling through the planes of existence. Now, Spellcaster 1998 references feeling more strongly attached to a different plane than the one they find their consciousness in. And is this possible? Well, it certainly is possible that you might have a very strong feeling for a plane other than your primary point of consciousness, and there's nothing wrong with that. I suspect that what Spellcaster 1998 is actually referencing is a feeling of not really being in the right place. And I don't know if that is exactly what this would be, but a lot of people have that feeling, and I tend to think it usually is because they're not quite in the right place yet. But if they keep working toward it, they will find it. But that's a different question. Getting back to the planes of existence, the journey of the soul through incarnation is a journey through these planes. And the farther you go in the planes, the more of the soul, the more of spirit, the more of deity is manifest in the physical. And ultimately, the goal is not to leave the planes of existence, but rather to express spirit so perfectly in them that both the virtues of spirit and matter are fully actualized. So that's what I would have to say about the planes of existence. I hope you find it interesting, and until next time, may you blessed be. Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse. And this is Reverend Don's Vlog. And today our question comes to us from Dragoquan. And Dragoquan has been one of the most prolific watchers of the Vlog and has asked many questions over the years. And it's very nice to be answering another question from Dragoquan. And our question today has to do with the idea of twin flames. And the idea of twin flames is both very ancient and very popular. It comes from Plato and also his student Aristotle. But it was also heavily revitalized by the Theosophy Society in the 19th and early 20th century and espoused by Edgar Cayce, I believe. So it has a lot of currency for people. It has quite a background. And what do I think of the idea of twin flames? Well, the idea of twin flames is that originally the soul was whole, but became divided into two parts, usually described as one male and one female, and their business is to find each other, at which point they will become whole. And this seems to appeal to a lot of people. I personally think it's nonsense. I not only think it's nonsense, I think it's very toxic. I think it encourages toxic relationships and toxic ideas about romance. So I completely repudiate the concept of twin flames. I do believe the soul has many incarnations, so if you want to describe it as being split, that's not a bad thing, but it's not this concept. It's not just split in two parts. The soul has many incarnations. The soul has many different expressions, even simultaneously, which we've done other vlogs about. But they are not they're not in this kind of understanding, the idea that some other person can complete you simply by being there. That is the idea behind twin flames, that if you find your twin flame, everything will be perfect and you will be whole, and this is nonsense. I'm a great believer in the sentiment expressed in the Wiccan Rede that if what you seek you find not within yourself, you shall never find it. Each division of the soul, every incarnation, is both part of a greater whole and whole in itself. And to find happiness, to find wholeness, to find completion, one must work on oneself. That's why we have shadow work. That's why we have a lot of things in metaphysics. They're there to help us to perfect our soul. It's not just a matter of magically meeting someone else. Now, if you were to ask me about the concept of Soulmates, I have a different answer for that depending on how you're using the word, and people do use the word differently. Some people use the term soulmate to mean twin flame, in which case I still think it's nonsense. But if you're using the term soulmate to mean a soul with whom you have a particularly strong relationship or a strong affinity, and that there can be many such souls, that I completely agree with. You will meet others in life who you seem to have known before, you have an instant attraction to, you have strong similarity with, who might be described as soulmates. But there's not just one of them, nor are they expected to make you whole. In fact, a relationship with someone who can be called a soulmate is often quite complex and often rather difficult because of everything that's already happened. And also simply because this is the nature of incarnation. Incarnation is not meant to be a walk in the park. Incarnation is meant to be a learning experience. You know, there's the famous saying that when we end this life, well, the speaker wants to slide into the end of life the way that a baseball player slides into home base at the last moment, beat up and dirty and bedraggled because they've lived so much. And that really is what incarnation is meant to do. We're not here to just sit around and be happy. We're here to learn, we're here to do, we're here to work on many different things. Soulmates can be of a number of different varieties. They can be other expressions of your own soul. They can be souls you've had many incarnations with. But there are souls that you will find a special rapport with, of different sorts for different souls. That I am perfectly in line with. If you read my books, you'll see I talk a lot about that. If you watch the old vlogs, you'll see that we talk a lot about that. Not always using that term, it's not my favorite term, but under that understanding, I think soulmate is a perfectly good way to look at certain relationships. But twin flame is a whole other concept. Part of the toxicity of the idea of twin flame is that you can never be whole in yourself. And I think that is a terrible, terrible teaching. Now, Plato lived well over 2,000 years ago. It's not to be surprised that our understandings may be different or perhaps in our terms better than his would have been. So I'm not criticizing Plato, I'm criticizing the idea. And you know, my attitude toward Plato and toward other great philosophers is that I take the good from their philosophy, but I realize because of the eras they lived in, there's going to be bad as well. Because all of these cultures were different from our own and had different ideas about certain specific things. Usually the role of women and the role of slavery, because almost all of the great historical philosophers lived in societies that were relatively misogynistic and that practiced slavery, neither of which we would approve of today. But that doesn't mean that nothing they said was good. It means you have to understand they were a product of their time. So there are certain things that I simply ignore in Platonic philosophy, and this would be one of them. I think that most people might be surprised to realize that Plato's writings are deeply metaphysical. Plato also wrote about the chakras. People often insist the chakras are a recent importation into Western culture. Nothing could be farther from the truth. Plato was writing about them all that time ago. And many other metaphysical things as well. What philosophy means in a Greek context is this. Many modern people make a differentiation between religion and spirituality. The Greeks would have expressed this as a difference between religion and philosophy. Religion was the public communal act of worship of the ancestral gods. Philosophy was your private understanding of the nature of the world and both physics and metaphysics, depending on the school of philosophy. They were largely schools focused on the nature of existence and morality. And unlike modern philosophy, they did not avoid spiritual concepts. They were very much about spirituality. So you'll find that the Platonic school of philosophy is heavily spiritual if you don't already know that. Chances are, if you're watching the vlog, you already do. So these are my thoughts on the subject of twin flame. Once again, I think it's nonsense. But if you want to talk about soulmates, there's lots of room to talk. And So I would encourage you to hit like, subscribe, or share, depending what platform you're watching this on. And I appreciate your watching the vlog. Please feel free to put questions in the comments section. I will deal with them. And I love to get questions and to answer them. It was once suggested that I would spend my afterlife as a spiritual vlog answering people's questions, which in all likelihood is true, because having done this kind of work all my life, I will probably do it as a spirit guide. But who knows what will come at that point. But I don't think I would object to that afterlife. And we can talk about afterlife and reincarnation in another vlog. So thank you for joining me, and until next time, may you blessed be. Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse. And this is Reverend Don's vlog. And today our question comes to us from Mike C., who watches the vlog on Magic TV at YouTube. And he has this question. Mike says that he has recently encountered the idea of physical immortality quite often. And he wants to know what I think of the idea of whether physical immortality is possible. And if it's not possible, why do we have all these stories of adepts who have supposedly achieved it? And he goes on to say that he thinks that it's actually a spiritual phenomena that people have perhaps misinterpreted, but he'd like someone else's take on it. And since he's asking me, you're going to get my take on it, and I hope you find it interesting. So the first question, do I consider physical immortality to be possible? I don't like to say anything is impossible, because I've experienced so many things in my own life that a person off the street would probably think was impossible. And it just doesn't really seem right to be assuming something is impossible when I know that other people's impossible things have been possible in my life. I try not to be what Marianne Kay likes to call a reality bigot. That is to say, someone who has unusual ideas about reality that they expect to be respected for themselves, but do not respect other people's different unusual beliefs about reality. So I try not to do that. And I try to assume that if someone says they've had an experience, they've really had that experience, unless I have some obvious reason to think otherwise. Although I don't always necessarily agree with their interpretation. An example of that are the paranormal shows that used to be everywhere, where they would do these investigations and there always seemed to be a demon in the basement who behaved like a poltergeist. And my answer to that is, well, it was a poltergeist. But they insisted on thinking it was a demon, in which case it was a very puny little demon, but the circumstances almost always actually corresponded to a poltergeist. So real experience, not the interpretation I would bring to it. With the idea of something like immortality, well, you know, I practice conscious immortality, conscious incarnation, which is a related concept. I also teach it. We have it in our third degree book, which I will show you again. And by the way, people who are waiting for the third degree book, they have been ordered. And for the paperback, they will be in around February 24th and then mailed out. For the hardback, it will be early March. But I believe in conscious immortality and believe that I have direct experience of it. I believe in time magic, which we also teach in that book, and have direct experience of it. But most people would say this couldn't possibly be. Well, it absolutely is in my experience. And so I'm not going to assume that just because I haven't seen something, that it could not be true. Having said that, I have not seen anything that would lead me to believe that someone has achieved physical immortality that I have met. So if you ask me if it's possible, I would say that I cannot say it's impossible, which is kind of like saying, you know, I'm not holding my breath, but I'm not going to rule it out because there are so many stories of it. And I want to say hello to everyone who is watching, and I hope that you're enjoying the vlog so far. So having said that I do not rule out the possibility, but I'm not holding my breath for the probability, we then have that question, why are there so many stories about this? And I have a couple of answers for that, a couple of very direct answers for that. And the first one, of course, is wish fulfillment. Many people feel they would like to have physical immortality, and it gives them comfort to believe people have achieved it. So that's one source of some of those stories. Another one is ancestor veneration. In most societies that venerate ancestors, and I come from a family that venerates ancestors, the belief is that the ancestors stay with you for a very long time. In certain cultures, they're connected to their tomb or another physical location. In other cultures, they're not necessarily. But um, this is a kind of spiritual immortality, which could certainly give rise to the idea that perhaps it could also be done physically. But the third thing I'm going to mention, I think, is the actual source of most of those stories of adepts who have achieved immortality. And this comes out of Buddhism particularly. I don't know if it's exclusively, but I've only heard of it in connection with Buddhism. But there is a practice of self-mummification in Buddhism. Um, and it has been a fairly widespread practice among ascetic monks historically, and there have been thousands of these self-mummified bodies that have existed, and in fact hundreds, if not thousands of them were destroyed in the 20th century during communist revolutions because they were seen as a symbol of the old regimes. The idea behind this was that the monks who were, as we would say, self-mummifying, they believed that they were merely going into a very deep trance, and they and others believed that they were still alive in this very deep trance for centuries. And there are still people, you'll still hear this, it is still a thing. The idea that this ancient mummified monk is actually alive, but moving so slowly that no one can detect anything. Um, and my answer to that is that I would say that no, they in fact did die, but their spirit may still be very much connected to that body because that was their intent, that is what they worked for. And what they would do is they would practice this with the intention of becoming a guardian for a location such as a temple or a physical area, and would then serve in this capacity as a spirit. And the most extreme form of the practice involved several years of eating a very restricted diet of things like pine nuts and resins and other things that eliminated a lot of the things that cause decay in the body, ultimately pretty much everything that causes decay in the body. And they would practice it in an area with the kind of climatic conditions that would tend to preserve a body, high in the mountains, for example. And many of these bodies, in fact, were so well preserved that if you were raised with the belief, you could be excused for thinking they were still alive because they look it. Others do not. It depends on the one. And what they would ultimately do is starve themselves to death, along with heavy meditation, which was intended to project their spirit along with their body into the future. Can you connect your spirit to something that way? Absolutely. This is very much also the idea of the Ka chapels in ancient Egyptian practice. And many other things historically have had a similar practice where a spirit is attached to a location or an object intentionally, as well as the unintentional attachments that are usually called hauntings. This, of course, would not be considered a haunting because it's an intentional thing, and it is not a matter of the spirit not being able to cross over. It is a very intentional process. I think that's probably the primary origin of a lot of the mythology of adepts achieving immortality, because the members of those branches of Buddhism that practice this absolutely believed that they had achieved immortality in this way. And in a manner of speaking, I would say that they did, because I have no doubt that this is a practice that is effective. What I would love to know is whether the destruction of the body, as happened quite a bit in the 20th century, caused the spirit then to move on, or if it simply attached to something else in order to maintain its duty. That I'm not sure how to really learn about sort of actually going to these places, which perhaps I will do one day, who knows. Um, but if anyone has ideas on that, I would love to hear them. So I think that's a lot of the origin of these stories, but not all of it. The other things I mentioned as well, together with the fact that, again, I'm not going to say that it isn't possible that anyone may have achieved physical immortality in some way. I just haven't seen it or anything that would cause me to have any understanding of how they might have done such a thing. So those are my thoughts on the matter. And if you like the vlog, please feel free to like, subscribe, or share according to the platform you're watching it on. Thank you for watching, and until next time, may you blessed be. Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from beautiful Florida, and this is Reverend Don's Vlog. And today I thought I would discuss the subject of free will. And there are a number of things we can talk about under this heading, including what is free will, do we really have free will, and do we always have free will? And again, these are several different permutations of the question, but I do intend to address them all. So do I think we have free will? Yes, I do think we have free will. But do we always have it? No, there are situations where we don't have total free will, and sometimes where we have no free will at all, because other things impinge on what we can do in the situation. Now, I would say that as magical people, much of that can be transcended, but I don't know that everything can be transcended, and certain things, I think, are simply meant to be in the situation. And that brings us to the question of what is free will, and how does it work? I was always taught that we have a contract in life, that before we're born, we ask for and agree to certain things that will happen, which are for the purposes of our soul's growth, and that this is not something forced upon us, but something we enter into by choice, which is not to say that there are not things that must happen at certain places that we might prefer to put in other places. But for the purposes of our soul, it's all there for our growth. And I was further taught that we reassess this contract constantly in life, literally in every moment. That we can say, no, this is not what I want, or I do not want this at this time, or can we change it? And as a magical person, we can do this. Sometimes it's easier than others. That's part of what shadow work is about. Removing those things that block our ability to change what is happening. And in theory, as magical people, if we are magical enough, most of those things we can bring under the ruling of our own free will, which is our ability to choose between different possibilities. Doesn't mean we can choose any possibility. For example, if I wanted to go up the street and buy a house right now, I could not do that because I do not have that money in cash in my pocket. And even if I did, I don't know that you could buy a house quite that quickly. There are all kinds of things around it that would mean that it would be subject to other considerations, at the very least, that it would take more time. So free will is limited in ways like that. If I wanted to go out and run a marathon at my age and with my mobility issues, I really could not do that either, at least not in a particularly effective way. And that's another way that free will is limited. There are a number of limits on what we can choose to do, but I do believe that within what we can do, we have free will, and that as magical people, we can expand that considerably. I do tend to believe that if one were sufficiently in line with one's higher self, that maybe everything could be expanded in that way, but most of us are not. Even when we are considerably well aligned with our higher self, but that goalpost of what is possible can certainly be moved through magical practices. I've done it many times in my life. I've seen other people do it. And most significantly, I've seen people do it who are not inherently magical people, not consciously magical people. I remember the lady who would win the lotto so frequently in small amounts that she could count it in her budget that at least once a week she was going to win at least $20. Happened every week. This was magic, but she was not consciously doing it. Knew another man who could destroy any situation within 24 hours. We used to joke that if only he would turn his powers to good, he would be quite something to be reckoned with. But he was on a self-destruct mission, and everything in his life would be destroyed as soon as it aligned in a good way. This too is magic, and is a prime case of why we need to have shadow work, because we do trip ourselves up in that way, but usually not to that extreme. So, speaking incarnationally, do we have free will? Well, yes, within these limitations we do, and most of these limitations, if not all of them, can be overcome through spiritual practice. What is free will? Free will is the ability to make choices within a certain parameter. And again, that parameter can be expanded through magical usage. Is it infinite? Absolutely not. And when we talk about the contract with the soul, are there certain things that simply are meant to be that we cannot change? Well, yes and no. In my opinion, there are certain things that our soul must have for its own purposes that we cannot change necessarily. But at a soul level, this again is by choice. And also, I do believe that if we are sufficiently well aligned, that yes, we could change it. It's all a matter of where we are and what our level of self-knowledge and skill is. I mentioned the man who can destroy any situation within 48 hours or 24 hours. That certainly is something he could have changed. Even if his soul needed it for some reason, he could have changed it if he were practicing metaphysically. He did not practice metaphysics. I've also seen people who do practice metaphysics do some amazing things. And I feel I've done some amazing things myself at different points in my life that I don't normally talk about. And it's been suggested to me I should talk about that sort of more personal thing more often. So maybe in future vlogs I will. So do I feel that we have free will? Yes, I do. Do I feel that it is without limit? Only for the most skilled. Do I feel that there is nothing we cannot change? No, I don't. I do think there are things that are difficult to change and perhaps impossible for most, but I don't think anything is existentially impossible. So those are my thoughts on free will, and I hope you find them interesting. And if you like the vlog, please hit like, share, and subscribe according to the platform you're watching on. And I want to take a moment and talk about the time of the vlog. I've been doing the vlog as a live broadcast, which is an interesting experience, very different from what I did for the 10 years previous. And I've been doing it at 1 o'clock Eastern, and I'm thinking of moving it to a later time. I'm thinking maybe 3 o'clock Eastern. That would be a little easier for me, but I would like to know what people who are watching the vlog would prefer. Is there a time that would be better for you than another time? I don't guarantee I could choose that time, but let me know what it is and I'll see what I can do. I had originally intended today to talk about the third degree proof copy. It is supposed to arrive today. It hasn't arrived yet, but this is probably going to be the subject of the next vlog, and I will share that with you. I'm enjoying doing vlogs again. I hope you're enjoying watching them. And if you have any questions, please put them in the comments section. If you have any subjects you'd like me to cover that perhaps are not actually questions, but simply topics, I will see if I can't cover them. And I want to thank you for watching. And I'm still getting used to this platform. So I want to thank the person who just gave a tip, but I'm not quite sure where to look to see who that person is. Oh, it was Michael. Thank you, Michael. And Michael also has a comment that free will seems to me that a lot of people misunderstand. And yes, I would have to agree. It's widely misunderstood. As I say, I have understood it in these terms. Not everyone does. I think free will is one of those things that for some people, is something that they put a lot of stock in but very little thought in. And I think that unfortunately is true for a lot of subjects for a lot of people. And in addition to everything we've talked about, because this brings up another subject, in addition to the physical limitations of free will, which again I believe in many cases we can address through magic, there are also the moral limitations. And those are by choice. I always feel that it's better to choose, we'll say, the good karma path as opposed to doing more negative things, because I feel that what you do comes back to you, and that the energy you surround yourself with is the energy you're going to have. So I try to do good things and have good energy. That's not really about free will in the existential sense, but in the personal what do I choose to do sense. And certainly people have the free will to be constructive or destructive. But when you are destructive, well, there's an old saying, you shouldn't mess in your own nest. And that's usually what it comes down to. And when people choose to do more destructive things, I think you tend to see a lot more mess around them. So anyway, these are my thoughts on free will. I hope you find them helpful. And until next time, may you blessed be. Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from beautiful Florida. And today our question comes to us from Skeptic Psychologist. And Skeptic Psychologist has this question from the deeper end of the pool. And the question is, if we believe in the idea of do as you will but harm none, and existence leads to suffering, should we not therefore take an anti-natalist position? That is to say, the idea that procreation in and of itself is bad because birth leads to suffering in a natural consequence, which is harm. And my answer to this is that if I accepted the premises of this question, I would have to agree. However, I look at it rather differently. And let me walk you through what I would say to this. Firstly, as a Correllian, we have a very particular understanding of do as you will but harm none. And that is that the word harm must be understood in a very traditional way, that you can't be extrapolating it in all kinds of different ways, which some people like to do. And generally we use the shorthand unprovoked or egregious damage. And that doesn't necessarily have to be physical, but it isn't necessarily just hurting someone's feelings. It requires actual damage to occur to constitute harm. That damage can be, again, emotional, but not just hurting someone's feelings. Now, that's the first thing that I would say. The second is the idea that existence automatically leads to suffering, and that suffering constitutes harm. Under our understanding of the term harm from the Wiccan Rede, suffering in and of itself does not necessarily constitute harm. Now, it may arise from harm, but in and of itself it doesn't necessarily constitute that, because suffering is an emotional state, which does not always have an external provocation. There are people who suffer endless tortures purely because of their own psychology, which have no external cause in this life at least, and can be very painful for them, but have nothing to do with the Wiccan Rede or with any kind of harm that has been done to them, at least in this lifetime. I would further say that the idea that existence leads to suffering, I would not agree with either. But that has to do with what is suffering and what causes it, which of course is one of the great philosophical questions of history. Buddhists notably have the point of view that suffering is caused by attachment, and if you can let go of all attachments, you will not have suffering. And this is really the whole basis of the idea of Buddhist practice. And as you recall, my understanding of karma is based on attachment. So I'm not entirely in disagreement with that, but I'm not entirely in agreement with it either. And many branches of Christianity hold that suffering ennobles the soul and exists for this purpose, a point of view that I also would not really agree with. Although I certainly agree that we can learn through situations in which we suffer, and I suppose we could say that our soul has been ennobled by that, but I don't think that it's inherently the case. I think it's sometimes the case. My view is that suffering arises from the difference between what you think should be and what actually is. And it comes from false expectations. Now, this is not to say that if you have a bad situation and wish that it would be better, that you are wrong. However, the difference is that if you have a bad situation and you wish to make it better and go about doing that to the best of your ability, that's one thing. It's another thing if you have a bad situation, but for some reason you think it should have been otherwise, for no particular reason except the idea that life should be fair. For whatever reason, the life that we have in this world is not what many people would describe as fair. Now, that would be a whole other question, and I'm not entirely sure that I would agree with that statement, but most people perceive it that way. I would say that because life is shaped by our attachments and our karma, that there is an inherent fairness even when it's not apparent. But most people, again, do not perceive it that way. And I think that most people's suffering arises from their expectation versus their reality. And if they would look at their reality in a realistic way and not worry about where it came from, but rather how to change it, that they would experience far less suffering. I think that part of it is the idea that we live in a fairy tale where everything should be nice, but that's not where we live. And again, if we look at our situations in a realistic way with a view to changing them, I think that we would avoid a lot of that suffering which comes from our angst over the idea that it should have been different. So I would say that when we talk about suffering, it isn't merely because we exist by any means, it's because of our expectations. And I'm not suggesting that we should change our expectations for the future, but perhaps that we should bring fewer expectations to the present, and rather take things as they are and improve them, rather than worrying about the fact that it isn't as we would have it. If everything was going to be as we would have it, the nature of incarnation would be very different. And we come here to learn, to grow, to experience, and our greatest growth comes through challenges. So naturally they will be there. And the idea that they shouldn't, in my opinion, is a false idea. It is not a truth. Those challenges should be there because they're why we have incarnated here, to learn from and to grow. And if we look at it that way, rather than as a terrible unfairness imposed upon us, I think we have much less suffering. And that's not to say that people's bad actions are not unfair. That's a whole other concept from what I mean. I'm referring to how we look at things in our lives. So what I would say is that, again, suffering arises from the difference between our expectation and our reality, and not merely because we exist. And suffering in and of itself has nothing to do with the concept of harm, because it often doesn't involve any. It just involves not being what you want. Now, indeed, suffering sometimes is caused by harm, but that is not inherent to the concept. It is the situation that may be so. And again, often what causes people to suffer has nothing to do with what's going on in terms of other people's actions, or even necessarily the world around them. It can be very internal. And again, it usually is because they expected or believed that things should be different than they are, whether or not what they have is really bad. So, what I would say is that, no, I would not take an antinatalist point of view. Rather, I would say that we're born for a reason, and that reason is to face the challenges of life and overcome them. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't, but because I believe the soul is immortal, the fact that we do not always overcome our challenges is not inherently bad. So those would be my thoughts on the matter. I hope you find them helpful, and until next time, may you blessed be.
Okay, so I thank you so much for being a part of Crossing the Rubicon with Cosmo. And I want to get right to introducing live from the Philippines with Rolando and Lake. But before I do, I'm just going to fire up a donation break video. Let's see if I can pull one up here. And that way we'll take you out gracefully. So thank you all very much. And I think you're going to have a fantastic time with Live from the Philippines.
You're watching the 2023 Correllians Live Telethon. The team here would like to thank you for all of your support in assisting us in bringing a contingent of paladins to the Parliament of the World's Religions in Chicago, Illinois, August of this year. We are trying to raise $10,000 to assist with the basic needs of housing, food, and travel expenses. Here are some words from the members of the event team on why it is important that we reach that goal.
I'm Pam Kelly. I am a member of the Sacred Order of Paladins, and I am here to tell you about why are we doing a telethon and how you can help us. Well, let me show you. Let me show you what's in the future. This weekend, Friday, 5 p.m. on Eastern Time, all the way till the 7th of May, which is Sunday at 7. We'll be doing 50 hours of magic and community, lots of shows, lots of guests. But what is it all for? Well, I'd love to show you about it rather than just tell you about it. We are planning to go to Chicago, the Parliament of the World's Religions. It's happening this August, and there's going to be leaders from all sorts of faiths there, as well as leaders from both the Correllian tradition. Circle Sanctuary will be there, and it's the place to be. And it's a place for us to be part of the conversation. This year, it's going to be a call to conscience, defending freedom and human rights, something that's very important to the pagan community, and also part of why we're paladins. We want to defend people, we want to protect people, and we want to be there to show a positive part of what we do as pagans. So please help us. This is happening in August, and we're trying to do what we can to raise money. And our biggest part of the campaign is this weekend. It is the road to the Parliament. So like I said, we'll be around all weekend long with lots of entertainment and shows and ways for community. So you're invited to be part of that. But also don't forget to donate if you can. The best way to donate, there's two ways, is to go to correllians.live/donate. And here are chances for you just to give an amount. And you can give credit to one of our paladins here, or none, just give it to all of us. We don't get the money, but it makes us feel nice. You know, we don't have a competition going on yet, but who knows? But it'll be friendly, obviously. The other way to do it is givebutter.com, givebutter.com/C/Correllians Live. And here, not only can you donate, but you can get some more information on why we're doing this. Also, where you can watch this on Pagan World TV, on Roku, Magic TV on YouTube, or streaming live on the web at Correllians.live. And you can share this. This is a good thing too. You can share this link with other people. Not only does it give you the opportunity to donate, but here's where we have the option. We're going to have plenty of items to bid upon, and you can start the bidding on Friday. It's going to be fun. There's all sorts of things. A 15-minute tarot reading with First Priest, Most Reverend Phoenix Coffin Williams. That's great. All these different readings here. Look at that chainmail pentacle wall hanging. Who would want that? I see a bidding war unrolling, unveiling, becoming a thing this weekend. A numerology chart. You know, I don't know if I should look at this right now. I can't bid yet, but we will be bidding all during the during the event. So please join us and please donate. We really would like to be at the Parliament here, manifesting vibes and support the paladins on our road to the Parliament. Thank you so much for listening and being part of this monumental effort and historical effort. So thank you. Blessings.
Hi, I'm Reverend Mary Hogg, and I am a member of the Sacred Order of the Paladins. Why are we going to the 2023 Parliament of World's Religions? because representation matters. It's important that pagans be there to show that we are a growing tradition, that we are a viable religion, and we need to take our seat among other world religions.
From all of us here at the 2023 Correllians Live Telethon, we want to thank you again for your support. Please be sure to check out Divination Alley and get yourself a reading. Or check out our online auction that is overflowing with wonderful craft items, books, and services for sale. Remember, our goal is to raise $10,000, so please help us spread the word about the event, our cause, and be sure to stay tuned for more. So thank you all again, and may you all blessed be. Enjoy the telethon.